Daniel, so we're talking about navigating the swirling storm of digital transformation, but AppDirect is a name that perhaps many people in the audience wouldn't know, even though they probably use devices that in some way are powered by your company. Can you give us a bit of an origin story of your company to start with?
Yeah, definitely. So we started AppDirect in the summer of 2009, and it was the height of the Great Recession. Businesses around the world were struggling. And in fact, my family had a furniture store started by my great-grandparents that was located in Main Street in Niagara Falls, Canada. And over the 100 years, they were able to thrive in selling furniture, expanding their inventory, and really having pride in running the store in the community. But when the recession hit, they had to shut down the business. And I really attributed that to lack of technology or access to technology and capital that would allow them to compete with larger players. And at the same time, I was visiting San Francisco and learned about the emergence of the cloud. Mm-hmm. And our belief is that the cloud, or specifically software as a service, which at the time was in its infancy, if brought to the world, would be able to help businesses like my family's thrive. So our original vision was to make business technology accessible globally. And over the last almost 10 years now, we've worked to bring software around the world, and we now power millions of businesses who log into our platform every day to get the software tools they need to thrive.
We're in the 21st century. People think that selling apps or selling devices to the public or selling almost anything to the public is a done deal, digitally speaking. But that's not the case, is it?
Yeah, so we've found a lot about what it takes to sell. And in the early days of SaaS in Silicon Valley, companies like Dropbox, Box, DocuSign, EcoSign, MailChimp, their predominant route to market was a freemium model where people would come online, subscribe to their solutions, and then start paying. But what those companies found is as they grew, the digital channel actually became a very small percentage of their overall business. And really what contributed to most of their business growth was the traditional channels. Things like telesales, field sales, resellers, things like selling through digital, are definitely a new wave that represent maybe 20 to 30% of a large business's portfolio of channel, but it's not all of it. So working and thinking about how you can leverage humans to sell, even if you're in the digital world, is super important to succeed.
Is there still a role for traditional selling in our digital economy?
Oh yeah, I mean, you look at a company like Salesforce. Why are those so strong? It's because they have incredible acumen at being able to sell, and their Salesforce is powered by technology that makes their people more productive. So I think when we think about digital transformation, it's not just transforming an organization, it's also about transforming yourself and enabling yourself to become more intelligent through tools, through data, through software, and really think and rewire your brain to be able to operate in a different culture and mindset. And actually, Kit, I know you just did that, so for those of you who don't know much about Kit, he started as a scientist for 7 years, went into the defense industry, and then pivoted into tech journalism.
So I digitally transformed myself.
Total digital transformer. Give it up for Kit! Woo!
Without using your company, sadly, but anyway. So we think there is still a place for traditional selling, but is it easy for a traditional company to transform themselves into addressing digital marketplaces?
Yes, no, it's not easy at all for any business to transform themselves. And what we found is businesses across every industry recognize that they need to become digital businesses. So maybe a decade ago, there was the difference between tech companies, which would be upstarts that would be tech leaders like a Google or an Amazon, and then there was versus the rest of the world. And you categorize yourself as a financial service company, a manufacturer, a telecom. And what we believe in the future is that every single business is essentially a digital service provider. They're going to be offering some form of subscription-based digital service. And whether you're a car company that wants to enable someone to drive a recurring car or eventually a self-driving car, whether you're a manufacturer like a Honeywell or Schneider Electric that's going to power elevators or switches or lights, whether you're a telecom provider that's going to enable connectivity, everyone needs to do so in a digital way, and therefore they're going to become a digital service provider. And what we found is that over the last decade, many industry incumbents really failed at succeeding in the digital economy because they were using their old processes, their old systems in order to operate. But we actually did a study, we called it the Digital Economy Index, of businesses around the world and their ability to digitally transform. And one really surprising thing that we found is those providers or big enterprises or small enterprises that actually had the title Chief Digital Officer or someone that was digital, that oversaw every department and had exposure to the CEO, they were much more likely to succeed at digital transformation because it signaled to the rest of the company that this digital initiative is important. And one of the things that we talked about in this Digital Economy Index a few years back is that there was more prevalence of a Chief Digital Officer in Europe than in America, by actually 30%. So I think it's about 80% of large enterprises in Europe have a Chief Digital Officer, whereas in the US it's maybe 60%. Now what that's done, I think, has really created a huge advantage for incumbents here to succeed.
Do you have any insight as to why that's the case? Is there a different business philosophy here versus in the US?
Yeah, I definitely think that in the US, particularly going back a few years ago, they were earlier to adopt certain technologies. So if you look at companies like Salesforce, like NetSuite, like Workday, they started by really gaining a lot of adoption in the US before expanding abroad. So the benefit of a lot of these business technologies to rewire your way of operating were actually particularly advantageous disproportionately in the US. However, I think people in Europe caught on and started saying, okay, how do we become digital? Not just in the way that we buy and procure software, but actually in our systems, in our processes, in our governance. And that's where I actually think that there's a huge head start here.
Do you think that in the future this is this digital transformation in Europe versus incumbents, the big names that we all know in the US, they're going to come more head-to-head, and some of those big names may even start losing business to some of the more agile, younger, new startups?
Yes, this is a great point. So actually, let's face it, if you look at the retail industry, they were likely single-handedly killed by Amazon. And there wasn't the ability to compete or fight. Now, I think that at this point, the reason why Amazon was able to be so successful in scale is because they were able to unlock their revenue potential in the digital economy. So when I think about digital transformation, I often break it down to two simple questions. What products do you want to sell, and what channels do you want to sell them through? And in this world today, you need to live in a multi-dimensional world, not in a two-dimensional world. And what I mean by multi-dimensional is you have to be able to sell multiple products really in a quick and agile way that you develop. Then you also need to sell multiple products from third parties that work well with yours to build an ecosystem. Now, not only that, you have to figure out the multitude of channels that you're going to sell through. So retail, field sales, digital channels, app stores. But then not only that, what we're finding is that the experience to access your software across multiple devices is more important than ever. So not only do you have to access multiple channels, you have to make sure it works across multiple devices. So again, multiple products and services that you develop from partnered with multiple third-party solutions across multiple channels and multiple devices. Now that creates massive back office complexity. It creates challenges in the way you operate your business. So if you want to unlock your revenue potential, you need to think through how you have the systems, culture, and processes to enable this multidimensional world. Now what Amazon did really, really well is they built a process and back office systems for distribution, for technology, for enablement that enabled them to bring tons of products to market all the time, really fast, from themselves and from third parties, and enabled them to be distributed in all sorts of ways. They built logistical chains, new physical distribution. They have a whole online exchange for other sellers. So the reason why I think they were most successful at unlocking their revenue potential over the last decade is they had the systems and technology to enable this multidimensional world. And actually that's what we've done at AppDirect over the last decade, is built the technology that enabled Amazon to compete, but now we can give it to traditional businesses and businesses that are big and small around the world. And that's really what we mean by making technology accessible.
And by businesses big and small, I mean, you're not talking about companies people don't know here. It's people like Samsung and...
Yeah, definitely. So we work with many providers here in Europe and around the world that you'd be familiar with. Everyone from Deutsche Telekom to Jaguar to Vodafone to software companies like Intuit and IBM, many others. And then we also work with millions of small businesses as well, like my family's business, to enable them to have access to these other technologies that make them successful in this digital world.
We're seeing a future where apps are in absolutely everything. My car, my Renault has a nice little tablet in its screen, and I can buy apps. I can buy games to play in my car, which is crazy. Are you seeing a future where there are apps in almost literally anything, from animals to cars to buildings to your refrigerator?
Yeah, for sure. So actually, in 2012, at a conference called CeBIT in Hanover, Germany, I had a slide that said there'd be apps everywhere, apps in your fridge, apps in your car, and then I put a picture of a cow, and I said apps in cows. And people thought I was crazy, like literally laughed me out of the room. And I saw like a comment on the CeBIT website being like, this guy was crazy. And probably like, too high energy for the audience, which might still be the case. But essentially what we found was that today, apps within agriculture, and particularly the use case of cows, have been super effective at alerting farmers of when cows are being birthed, so they can increase the likelihood that cows at birth end up either being able to be milked or farmed. So it's actually like super good use cases in agriculture. And one of the things that we talk about in the vision of making technology accessible globally, what we really mean is the ability for everyone to have equal access and equal opportunity to software. A good analogy for this, and Kit was asking me about this earlier, is actually the state of the music industry. Mm-hmm. So most of you likely, right now, right here, you have access to the world's library of music. And we take that for granted, but it actually took millions of years of evolution from the first sounds to the phonograph where sound could be recorded, to distribution through stores like Virgin Records and Virgin Media, to then the record labels, and then Napster, and then Spotify. And now finally we're at a place where software can actually be successful globally. Where music can. Mm-hmm. And I think if you take that example in the software world, we actually couldn't be farther from that case. It's super fragmented. You have to buy from all different vendors. The stuff doesn't work well together. Businesses don't know where to go to get their things. So really, that's what we're trying to solve as an ecosystem, is making technology accessible globally.
As that globalization of digital economy expands, do you see a collision between providers and traditional companies? For example, I can buy a car that has an Apple-compatible dashboard in it, and I would buy apps directly from Apple. Or I could have a car that has a Renault-compatible dashboard in it and buy apps via Renault. As the future goes on, do you foresee that access to how people get apps will be a question of who owns the store or who owns the interface?
Yeah. So I think we are living in an open world where ecosystems prevail. And the reality of that is, culturally, we need to build in the notion of co-opetition. So you're going to be partnering with your competitors, and you're going to be partnering with others that can help you grow. And we see that all the time, that we have some competing business lines, and our kind of brand promise is that we'll remain open, agnostic, and extensible to enable the APIs for people to come together, even if that potentially means competing with ourselves. But I definitely think in the use case of a car, so it's, auto is a great example, is that I believe in the future people will subscribe to cars, not buy them like we do today. And with that subscription will become the ability to upgrade features within that car seamlessly. So if you want a self-driving capability, upgrade it. If you want to have education for your kids in the back seat, or infotainment for knowledge, you can. If you want to be able to make the car go faster, you should be able to buy that using oral voice. And all these things will be enabled on demand by many, many different providers. And as a user or someone in the car, you don't really have to worry about, is it Apple or is it Jaguar or is it Renault or is it Google or is it this app developer? All you care about is getting the solutions you want in an accessible way at the best price. And I think that's really where the world is going with partnerships and ecosystems.
And we can't talk about that kind of innovation without talking about advertising, because as soon as you have a space where you can sell to a client an app or via a digital marketplace, you have to somehow involve advertising. Is that true, or is that a statement that will slowly fade away in time?
Yeah, so my belief on ads, how many people find ads productive? Like, do you click on Google AdWords, or... So I see not so many hands. No. Not many at all. So I think the same thing is that we have this like overload era where there's so many ads that are getting thrown at you that are irrelevant, that you almost tune them out, or you kind of ignore the services with ads. So really, kind of the room is, I think, very representative of the way that I feel. However, with big data and intelligent data, you can start to get to the point where relevant services come to you, and it's actually not in the form of ads, but in the form of a very intelligent recommendation on how to make your business more productive. So someone could say, in order to boost revenue by 6%, you can use MailChimp to drive a targeting campaign, and for your industry, here's the way to facilitate that campaign. Do you want to do it, yes or no? And there, it doesn't feel like an ad. It's actually probably a no-brainer. And over time, you'll build trust in those recommendations. So it's almost the opposite phenomenon of an ad, where early days of advertising, Google AdWords, you'd see something, you'd click on it, it might be relevant. And then because of overload, now you just have no trust in it, so you never go there. But I think what will happen is the opposite. We're using data to drive intelligent recommendations. We'll just keep getting smarter and smarter and make you stronger and stronger, and therefore the trust will be built, and that will shift the whole model for a company like Google that's primarily ad-driven.
So you're literally talking about building privacy into a digital marketplace right from the core. The customer owns their own identity digitally to a client of yours, for example.
Definitely. So actually, I'm a tech person, love embracing technology, but I'm a huge believer in regulation around data privacy and security. And we actually worked early days with Deutsche Telekom and with the German government. And at that same CeBIT conference where I talked about apps and cows, we also launched on stage with René Obermann, who was the CEO of Deutsche Telekom at the time, and Angela Merkel, the German chancellor. And they talked about how they secured the cloud in Germany for the first time. And what they did is went through huge lengths to make sure that the data was secure, the Germans could have trust in where that data was, and that it wasn't just on the servers in the US of some company that could have an issue. And I think that's where trust and investment was built. And I think we're moving to a world where people are going to demand to know where their data is stored. They're going to want it wiped. And I think that's perfectly fair.
And we could talk about this all day. But sadly, our time has run out nearly. Can you give us 10 seconds on where you think the future of digital transformation is going to go?
Definitely. So I think the future of digital transformation is really going to start by digitally transforming yourselves. And we like to call those people digital heroes. So people who have the courage, the excitement, the energy to be able to think through the way the world's going to work in the future and map their business to that. So I'll leave it with these two questions. For your business or for yourself, what products do you want to sell, and what channels do you want to sell them through, and how do you think through that future and enable a scalable way for you to grow?
Excellent. Daniel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Great. Awesome.
Excellent.
Good stuff, man.